You remember me now. I don't think people really understand what abandonment does to a man until they've lived it, not in the casual sense, not just a breakup or some mutual drifting apart, but the kind where the person you built your life around chooses to walk away, and they don't even pretend to look over their shoulder. When she left, it wasn't a clean cut. It was the kind of wound that tears slow, like fabric caught on a nail, messy, jagged, humiliating. We were living in Minnesota at the time, just outside Duluth. Cold winters, quiet roads, neighbors that waved from their porches but never got too close. I thought we were settled. I thought we were building something, marriage as a slow-burning fire, tended daily, not flashy but warm. I wasn't perfect. God knows I wasn't. I worked too much, spoke too little, kept my feelings locked behind a ribcage that never learned softness. But I loved her. I loved her in ways I didn't always know how to say. When she left, she didn't give a dramatic speech. She didn't scream or cry. She packed her bags one snowy morning while I was at work, left her wedding ring on the kitchen table beside a note so short it felt like mockery. I can't do this anymore. Don't contact me. That was it. 11 years of marriage dissolved into a single sentence. By the time I came home and found it, she was already crossing the Canadian border. I learned later she'd gone to Toronto first, then out to British Columbia with someone she'd met online. A man who wrote poetry and told her she was radiant. A man who made her believe I was the cage and he was the open sky. I didn't beg. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I broke down in private, in the silence of our empty house, in the bathroom with the shower running to cover the sounds. I told myself I'd give her space. I told myself she'd come back once the fantasy wore off. She didn't. Weeks became months. Months bled into years. She posted photos online hiking in Banff, drinking wine in Kitsilano, smiling on beaches I'd never seen with a man whose name I refused to learn. She looked younger in those pictures. Freer. As if I'd been the weight she needed to drop to breathe again. People asked about her less and less. At first they were cautious, then sympathetic, then awkwardly silent. I became that guy whose wife ran off. Some offered condolences like she'd died. Others avoided the topic altogether. I kept working. I sold the house. I moved to Wisconsin for a while, then down to Illinois. Then eventually to Colorado. Distance made breathing easier. I didn't date seriously. Not because I worshipped her memory, I didn't, but because something fundamental in me had been hollowed out. Trust isn't a faucet you just turn back on. Love isn't a language you become fluent in again overnight. I learned to live alone. I learned to cook for one. I stopped imagining what she was doing. I stopped checking her name on social media. Eventually, she became a dull ache instead of a bleeding wound. I thought that was healing. Maybe it was. Maybe it was just scar tissue. Then, almost 9 years later, she reached out. Out of nowhere. No apology in advance. No soft re-entry. Just a message that said, "Can we talk?" like she'd left a conversation mid-sentence instead of detonating our entire lives. The number was Canadian. I stared at it for a long time before replying with nothing more than, "Why?" Her answer came an hour later, "I made a mistake." 3 words. As if they were sufficient currency for the debt she'd accrued over nearly a decade. I didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. But I didn't block her either. Maybe curiosity is just another form of self-harm. She called a week later. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail, her voice softer, older, with cracks I didn't recognize. She said his name, her Canadian poet, the man she'd wrecked our life for. She said he'd left her. Said it fell apart. Said she'd never stopped thinking about me. That part made me laugh out loud, a sound so bitter I barely recognized it as my own. That night, I sat in my apartment outside Denver, looking out at the Rockies in the distance, trying to reconcile the past with the present. I thought of her standing in our kitchen the morning of our wedding, hair half-pinned, smiling at me with sleepy eyes. I thought of the way she used to tuck cold feet under my legs when we watched movies. I thought of the note she'd left beside her ring. I thought of all the mornings I woke up alone for years afterward, training myself not to reach across the bed. And now she wanted to talk. Now she wanted me to hear her out. Now that life had come back around and bitten her. I didn't call her back. Not yet. But I didn't delete the voicemail either. That's the kind of man I'd become, too principled to chase, too wounded to trust, too curious to sever the line completely. And I hate her for making me that man. I hate myself for letting her. But here's the part I never say out loud: some nights, after the world goes quiet and I'm left with the hum of the refrigerator and the thud of my own heartbeat, I wonder if I'll take the call one day. Not because I forgive her. Not because I want her back. But because there's a part of me, small, spiteful, and undeniably human, that wants her to see what she lost. I don't know yet what I'll do. But if she thinks I'm the same man she left behind in the Minnesota cold, she's in for a brutal awakening. She didn't stop with the voicemail. A couple of weeks passed, and I thought maybe she'd taken the silence as an answer. But then a letter showed up, an actual handwritten letter, of all things forwarded through my old P.O. box in Illinois. I didn't even realize it was still active. My name on the envelope stopped me cold. I recognized her handwriting immediately. There are some things you don't forget, even when you want to. I sat at my kitchen table with it for nearly an hour before opening it. The paper smelled faintly like some kind of floral detergent, like she'd folded part of her new life into it without meaning to. The first line was, "I know I don't deserve your time." At least she got that part right. She told me she'd moved back to the States, to Vancouver, Washington first, then down into Oregon, and now she was in Montana temporarily, whatever that meant. She said she'd been thinking about what she had thrown away and that she wanted to apologize properly. Those were her words. Properly. As if apologies were some kind of formality she'd skipped the first time. She mentioned the man she left me for only once. He wasn't what I thought. That was it. No elaboration, no detail. I guess she thought I'd fill in the rest with whatever version suited me. Maybe she assumed I'd imagine betrayal or heartbreak or karmic collapse. Truth is, I didn't picture anything. I didn't care enough to. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "If you'll see me just once, I'll never bother you again if that's what you want." I read that line 3 times. The arrogance of it, that she could bargain access to my life like a customer service return policy. I didn't write back. Another month passed. I went on with work, with the quiet routines I'd built: morning coffee at the same spot near the trailhead, weekends where I hiked up into the foothills just to feel my legs burn, evenings where the only voice in my house came from whatever show I'd half watch while cooking dinner for myself. You'd be surprised how peaceful emptiness can become when you stop running from it. Then she showed up. I'm not exaggerating. She came all the way to Colorado. I still don't know how she found my address. She knocked on my door on a windy March afternoon, hair shorter than before, face thinner, eyes shadowed in ways that didn't exist when she left me. She wasn't wearing makeup. She had a coat on that looked too light for the cold, and her hands were shaking. I didn't open the door right away. I just stood there on the other side, staring at the wood like it might answer for me. I thought about ignoring her completely. Letting her talk to a locked door. But something in me, not mercy, not softness, maybe just morbid curiosity, made me crack it open. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She didn't cry either. She just exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for 9 years straight. She said my name like it was an apology and a confession and a plea all at once. I stepped outside but didn't invite her in. She looked at the mountains behind me instead of my face. She said, "You look different." I said, "So do you." That was all. She tried to hand me another letter. I wouldn't take it. Her hand hovered in the air for an awkward few seconds before she pulled it back. She said she knew she had no right to ask anything of me, but she needed me to hear her. Really hear her. She said the life she left me for hadn't been what she imagined, not just the man, but the version of herself she thought she'd become. She said she'd been stupid, restless, selfish. That she thought she was outgrowing me, only to realize too late she'd just been running from herself. I listened in silence. Not because she deserved it, but because the part of me that used to love her was still buried in there somewhere, fossilized in a layer of anger and exhaustion. And I think some stubborn part of me wanted to know just how far she'd fallen. There's something ugly and deeply human about that. She told me she wasn't married. No kids. Said she'd thought about reaching out years earlier but didn't because she was ashamed. I don't know if that was supposed to sound noble. All I heard was that she only came back when the life she gambled on collapsed. At one point, she looked at me and asked if I was happy. I don't know why, but that question made me angry in a way nothing else had. What right did she have to ask me that? Happiness wasn't something she left me with. It was something I had to excavate from the wreckage she created. I told her she needed to leave. My voice was calm. Almost conversational. She looked like she'd expected it but still wasn't ready to hear it. She nodded, wiped at her face, not crying, just collecting herself, and asked if she could at least write to me one more time. I said, "You can do whatever you want. Just don't expect an answer." Then I went back inside and closed the door. I didn't watch her walk away, but I heard the footsteps. They sounded smaller than I remembered. Later that night, sitting alone in the dim light of my living room, I felt a strange mix of unease and vindication. I don't know if that makes me cruel. I just know that for the first time in years, I wasn't the one haunted by what happened. She was. And I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a dark, quiet satisfaction in that. I don't think people understand how quiet a house can get when someone leaves you without warning. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just sit in the air, it seeps into the walls, into your lungs, into your sense of time. After she left, our home in Minneapolis felt like a paused movie. Her mug was still in the sink. Her sweater still draped over the arm of the couch. The indentation her body left on the mattress took weeks to fade. I didn't move anything at first. It was like I was negotiating with absence, convincing myself she'd just walk back through the door and say it was all some kind of confusion. But she didn't. For a long time, I thought the worst part of abandonment was the not knowing. Where she was, who she was with, what she was thinking when she packed up her suitcase while I was at work. But I was wrong. The real damage wasn't in the moment she left, it was in the years that followed, the slow erosion of memory and identity and expectation. When someone you love decides you're dispensable, you start measuring yourself by the space they left instead of the person you still are. I was 34 when she walked out. Old enough to have built a life, young enough to think I could still salvage one. We'd been married for almost 7 years. Together since our mid-20s. We met in Chicago. Funny how that city still feels more like a ghost of us than a place on a map. She was from Ottawa, said she wanted to move somewhere alive. I was a Midwest boy who thought moving 2 states over made me worldly. We met at some crowded New Year's Eve party thrown by people we both barely knew. We kissed at midnight not because of chemistry, but because we were standing near each other and too polite to look away. I fell in love with her in fragments, her laugh, the way she always tapped surfaces with her nails when she was thinking, how she'd sing while cooking even though she couldn't hold a note to save her life. She used to burn grilled cheese somehow. It became our running joke. Then marriage makes everything serious by default. You stop noticing the quirks and start noticing the patterns. And if you're not careful, you start realizing too late that the version of love you built might not be the version they're still living in. I didn't see it coming when she left. Not the actual moment. But in hindsight, sure, I see the breadcrumbs. The way she started spending more time visiting friends in Toronto. The way she kept saying she missed home, but she never said it like she missed me when she was gone. She started talking about feeling restless and unseen, and I was stupid enough to think that meant she needed more weekends away, more breathing room, more of my trust. I never thought it meant she was already running emotionally before she ever packed a bag. After she left, I couldn't remember how to sleep properly. I'd just lie there listening to the neighbor's dog bark or cars pass or the creak of the house settling. Nights stretched like long hallways with no doors. I stopped cooking. Stopped making plans. Stopped answering calls from friends who just wanted to check in. Man. It's painful how embarrassed you feel when someone leaves you without a good reason. As if the absence of an explanation is proof that you weren't even worth the courtesy of being broken up with properly. My parents tried. God, they did. My mom drove down from Duluth and cleaned my entire house like she was scrubbing away the memory of my marriage. My dad took me fishing even though he hadn't picked up a rod in 10 years. They both looked at me like I was made of thin glass. And I let them, because I didn't know how to be anything other than broken. But time doesn't sit still for heartbreak. Bills still show up. The seasons still change. People still ask you if you're coming to your cousin's wedding or if you're going to renew the car lease. The worst part? Nobody prepares you for the fact that life goes on in a really boring, procedural way even when your personal universe has caved in. So I worked. I buried myself under overtime and projects and spreadsheets and bullshit meetings. I didn't do it because I cared, I did it because if I stopped moving, I'd drown in the echoes of every conversation we'd ever had. I started wearing headphones around the house just to drown out my own thoughts. Some nights I'd fall asleep on the couch with the TV on just so I didn't have to face the bed alone. It took almost 2 years before I donated her clothes. 3 before I stopped checking mutual friends' social media just to see if she appeared in a background somewhere. 4 before I could say her name out loud without it catching in my throat. Healing doesn't feel like healing when you're living it. It just feels like surviving with slightly less effort than the year before. But here's the thing, I never admitted to anyone out loud, I never replaced her. Not emotionally. Not situationally. I dated eventually. Slept with people. Tried to be normal. But nobody ever made me feel like I could exhale the way I used to with her, back when things were good. And maybe that's the part that lingers, the idea that you can love someone, lose them brutally, and still carry around the best of what they were even when they don't deserve it. And I thought that was it. That was my ending. My identity became the guy whose wife left and never looked back. It hardened into a fact about me, like my height or my eye color. And I lived that way long enough that when she finally reappeared years later, across a border, with the voice of someone who'd seen ghosts, I didn't even know how to process it. But that part comes later. Before she reached out, I had to become someone else just to survive the version of myself she abandoned. I think there's this stupid myth people cling to that time heals, that if you just keep breathing long enough, the pain packs its bags and leaves like it owes you the courtesy. But time doesn't heal anything. Time just teaches you how to carry it without dropping it all over the floor. Somewhere around the 5th year after she left, yeah, 5, I realized I was no longer building my life around the crater she made. I didn't notice the shift when it happened. It wasn't a breakthrough moment, no dramatic inner monologue, no sunrise epiphany. It was more like looking in a mirror one random Tuesday and realizing I didn't hate my reflection. By then I'd moved to Denver. Work relocated me, and I didn't argue. I figured starting over in a new city might make it easier to stop living like my life had been cancelled mid-season. I got an apartment with big windows and a view that looked like it belonged to someone with a future. I bought furniture that didn't have history attached to it. And for the first time in years, I chose things because I liked them, not because we picked them out together once. My brother used to joke that I looked like a widower who never told anyone he was married. Quiet, polite, functional but hollowed out in the middle. I didn't disagree. Then slowly, without fanfare, I started filling in the empty spaces. I reconnected with old college friends over Zoom during the pandemic and ended up visiting one in Vancouver when travel opened back up. Funny how Canada kept weaving itself into my life whether I wanted it to or not. I stood on the seawall at Cole Harbour with a coffee in my hand, and for the first time, I didn't immediately think of her being somewhere in that same country. I just breathed. Exhaled without flinching. I didn't fall in love again, but I stopped running from people who cared about me. I dated a woman named Erin for a little over a year. She was kind, smarter than me, worked in environmental policy, and always smelled faintly like eucalyptus. She asked just once about my ex-wife, and when I didn't answer right away, she just nodded and said, "Okay. When you're ready." I didn't tell her the full story, not really. I think I was afraid that speaking it out loud might drag me backward. We ended things eventually. Not because of her. Because I still felt like someone who had survived a house fire and didn't trust the shape of any new walls. She told me I was good, but unreachable. I wish she could know how far I'd come to even be reachable halfway. My career took off more than I expected. I think throwing myself into work for so long eventually paid off in ways I didn't predict. Regional director by 41. Salary I never thought I'd see. Travel. Respect. The kind of confidence that comes not from arrogance but from exhaustion and survival. My parents got older. My dad had a heart scare. I drove to Minnesota during a snowstorm to be with him in the hospital. Sat in that sterile room and thought about how I'd once imagined having kids with her, imagined being a father, imagined building a family that didn't replicate the silences I grew up with. Life has a dark sense of humor. I became the man I was meant to be after the person I envisioned it with had already walked away. But I wasn't broken anymore. That was the strange part. I didn't forgive her. I didn't miss her. I didn't even fantasize about closure. It was like she'd become a foreign country I lived in once, vivid in memory but irrelevant to the life I had now. And then, of course because the universe loves timing that feels scripted, I saw her name for the first time in almost 8 years. I was clearing out an old email account I barely used anymore, the one we shared bills and appointments on, and there it was. Not a message. Not a draft. A notification that someone had tried to reset the password. Her name. Her email. Her attempt. I remember staring at it for a long time, feeling nothing at first. Then something like a cold ripple started at the base of my neck. Not heartbreak. Not longing. Something closer to violation, like someone jiggling the handle of a door they no longer had the right to touch. I didn't reach out. I didn't ask why. I just changed the password, deleted the account entirely, and sat in silence afterward. That old silence. But this time, it didn't swallow me. It just sat beside me, acknowledging an old version of myself I'd buried. I thought that would be the end of it. A glitch of the past bleeding into the present. But that was only the first knock on the door. I didn't know yet that she was coming, not by accident, not by coincidence, but on purpose. With intention. With need. And I had no idea how unrecognizable I'd be to her when she finally did. I don't know what I expected after that password reset attempt. Maybe nothing. Maybe I assumed it was some accidental brush with the past, like someone drunk dialing an old number and hanging up before anyone answers. For a while, I forgot about it. Or maybe I pretended I did. But she didn't stay a ghost. It was a Thursday. Early afternoon. I remember because I was between back-to-back meetings, heating leftovers in the office kitchen, scrolling through my phone without really seeing anything. The number that flashed on my screen was from Ontario. I wouldn't have answered under any normal circumstance. Spam, wrong number, recruiter, but something in my gut made me swipe. I didn't say hello at first. I just put the phone to my ear and waited. Then I heard it. Her voice. Older, rougher around the edges, quieter somehow, like someone had turned the volume down on her over the years. Evan. I didn't speak. I don't even think I breathed. My name in her voice felt like someone walking across a spot in the floor I'd forgotten was hollow. She tried again. Evan, it's me. As if I wouldn't know. She said her name like it might break in her mouth. I still didn't answer. Not out of spite, at least not in the first 5 seconds. It was disbelief. Shock. A flicker of anger that flared and cooled almost at the same time. Finally, I said, "How did you get this number?" That was all. Not hi. Not what do you want. Not why now. She hesitated. I could practically hear the shame in her breathing. Your brother. I reached out to him on Facebook. I closed my eyes. Of course. My brother, who still believed in giving people chances. My brother, who always thought I'd want closure someday. I walked out of the kitchen and shut my office door. Not to give her privacy, to give myself a room where I could control the walls. What do you want? I finally asked. There was a silence on the line that somehow hurt more than any words she could have thrown at me. Then she spoke, and I knew instantly something was off. I'm in Minneapolis. I'm at a hotel. I needed to see you. It was like she'd dropped a stone in a frozen lake. Everything in me went still. She'd come back to the city she'd walked out of. After almost 8 years. Without warning. Without invitation. I don't want to see you, I said flatly. And I meant it more than I've meant most things in my life. She sniffed softly, trying not to sound like she was crying. Please, Evan. I know I have no right. I know what I did. But I need to talk to you. Just once. It would have been easier if she'd sounded arrogant or entitled. But she sounded desperate. And desperation from her was something I'd never heard before. I didn't say anything. I just let the silence do the speaking. She rushed into it anyway. I made a mistake. Her voice shook. I made so many. And I paid for it every day since. I need you to know I didn't leave because you weren't enough. I left because I was. I cut in before she could finish rewriting history. Stop. Another small, broken breath on her end. I'm not meeting you, I said. Whatever you came here for, leave it alone. I don't want it. Evan. No. Silence again. Then, soft as a bruise, I'm sick. 3 words. No elaboration. But they landed like a punch I hadn't braced for. I leaned against the edge of my desk and stared at the floor. That doesn't change anything. I know, she whispered. But I had to tell you. I wanted to hang up. Every part of me wanted to. But I couldn't move. Couldn't think straight. She tried one last time. If you would just meet me for 5 minutes. I'm not your husband, I said quietly. Not your friend. I'm not anyone you get to ask favors from. That's when she finally cried openly. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a soft crumbling on the other end of the line. I'm at the Radisson on 7th, she said finally. If you change your mind. I won't. I know. Her voice broke. I know. Then she hung up. I stood there for a long time, phone still in my hand, throat tight enough to cut off air. I expected rage. Or maybe vindication. But what I felt was something worse. Nothing clean. Nothing simple. Just the sickening awareness that ghosts don't stay buried just because you stop mourning them. And she was here. In my city. Sick. Asking for something I hadn't named and would never give. I put the phone down. Locked my office door. And for the first time in years, I said her name out loud, not with longing, not with love, but like spitting out something that had been stuck in my mouth for far too long. I didn't go to her that night. Or the next. Or the one after that. But pretending I could just ignore the weight of her voice was a fantasy that lasted maybe an hour before it started clawing at me. It's a humiliating thing to admit that someone who broke you can still make your pulse kick like a trapped animal just by reappearing. I had spent years becoming someone new, someone whole. And for a moment, she dragged me right back into the version of myself I used to be, stunned, discarded, scrambling to understand a pain I hadn't asked for. I barely slept that first night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the storm outside shoved wind against my windows. Minneapolis winters haven't softened since she left, I have. Or at least I thought I had. At 2 a.m., I found myself imagining her in some hotel off 7th Street, wrapped in those stiff white sheets that always smell faintly of bleach and loneliness. Sick. Alone. Wanting something from me she couldn't name. I hated that I wondered what kind of sick she meant. There are illnesses that whisper and illnesses that scream, and I didn't know which kind had backed her into reaching for me, of all people. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. I gave a presentation. Answered emails. Ate an apple at my desk. But every time I blinked, her voice surfaced in the dark behind my eyes. By noon, I'd convinced myself I was handling it fine. By 2 p.m., I realized I hadn't heard a word anyone had said to me all day. Around 5, after everyone else had left, I sat alone in the office with the city lights bleeding through the tinted windows and finally let myself say the truest thought I'd had since the call. She wasn't just reaching out to apologize. She needed something. She'd said she was sick, but not dying, not explicitly. Not that I knew. And I know her, she never used to lead with vulnerability. If she was telling me that up front, then she was desperate. Desperate enough to come back to the man she walked away from without a backward glance. I thought about ignoring it. About pretending the call never came. About deleting her number, blocking the Ontario area code, warning my brother to never slip up like that again. But here's the thing no one tells you about moving on: it doesn't erase your memory, it just dulls the reflex to bleed. So yeah, it still hit something in me. Not love. Not pity. Something darker. Something shaped like unfinished business, like a wound that healed crooked. I didn't decide to see her. Not then. But I couldn't pretend she hadn't cracked something open. That night, instead of going home, I drove past the streets we used to walk, past the little Italian place where she'd once declared the lasagna better than air. Past the apartment building where we'd briefly rented before buying our house. It doesn't even look the same anymore. New paint. New balconies. New people, with no idea that once, laughter and arguments and broken promises had echoed in those halls. I ended up parking outside the Radisson. I didn't go in. I just sat across the street with the engine idling, headlights off, watching people come and go in heavy coats and slush-stained boots. I didn't even know what window might be hers. I just stared at the hotel like it had stolen something and was daring me to take it back. My phone buzzed once around 8 p.m. A text. Unknown number, but I knew it was her before I opened it. I won't contact you again. I just needed you to know I'm here. I'm leaving Sunday if I don't hear from you. Nothing else. No pleading. No backstory. No explanation for the illness or the timing or the audacity. Just that. I stared at the screen for a long time and then turned the phone face down on the passenger seat like it might burn through the glass. I didn't reply. I did something worse. I sat there for another hour, imagining her on the other side of that building, checking her phone, hoping. And I wasn't sure if I wanted her to suffer more or if I wanted answers I'd sworn I no longer needed. I lasted 2 more days. Not because I was indifferent. Not because I was above it. Because I was furious that she still had the power to make me think at all. Saturday came like a hangover I hadn't earned. I woke up before sunrise, sat on the edge of my bed, and realized I hadn't slept more than a handful of hours across 3 nights. My body felt like a shell I was borrowing. My mind was louder than it had any right to be. I made coffee I didn't drink. I showered without noticing I'd turned the water too hot. I tried to read the news on my phone, but every word blurred into the same sentence. She's here. She's sick. She wants something. By noon, I was pacing the living room like a caged animal. There are moments in life when staying still is more dangerous than any choice you could make. This was one of those. Around 2 p.m., I got in the car without deciding to. Drove the same route I'd taken 2 nights before. Ended up in the same spot across from the Radisson. This time I didn't just sit there. I walked inside. The lobby had that corporate sterility generic carpet, fake plants, a front desk with a forced smile behind it. I stood there longer than necessary, long enough that the woman at the counter started to greet me before I held up a hand. I'm meeting someone, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. I didn't know her room number. I didn't even know if she was still there. She'd said Sunday. It was Saturday. She could have left early. Part of me hoped she had. But I took the elevator anyway. I don't know what instinct guided me, but I got off on the 6th floor. Walked down a hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and loneliness. And then halfway down I saw her through the open gap of a room service tray being collected. She was sitting on the edge of the bed inside a room with the door slightly ajar. Staring at her phone like she'd been doing it for hours. She looked older. Not just older in the natural way time marks us, but older like life had scraped things off her that don't grow back. Her hair was shorter. Shoulders slightly hunched. Eyes hollow in a way I'd never seen when she was 28 and full of certainty she was owed more than what we were building. I knocked on the door frame instead of the door itself. She jumped. Then she saw me. And I swear her face did something I wasn't ready for. Not hope. Not joy. Something closer to shock that her gamble hadn't failed. I stood there without crossing the threshold. You have 5 minutes, I said. My voice didn't sound like it belonged to a man who once planned to grow old with her.